The notification came on a Thursday morning, which is the kind of detail you don't think you'll remember but somehow do. I was sitting cross-legged on my apartment floor in Portland, eating leftover pad thai straight from the container and reviewing a contract on my laptop when my phone lit up with a text from my mom. Just 4 words, "Your aunt called again." I set down my fork. My aunt and I have what you might call a complicated relationship, which is a polite way of saying she has never once in 31 years looked at me without that particular expression. A kind of sad, resigned pity, like she's watching a stray dog try to cross a highway. She's my dad's older sister. She's the kind of woman who sends Christmas cards with a printed newsletter inside listing every achievement her family accomplished that year. Her son made honor roll. Her husband got promoted. They went to Tuscany. She has been sending those newsletters since I was 9 years old, and I have never once appeared in them, even in the years when I probably deserved a mention. I was the cautionary tale at family dinners, the one who dropped out of her MBA program, the one who turned down a perfectly good offer at a consulting firm to do something with websites, which is how my aunt described my work for the first 4 years I ran my own business. After that, she upgraded it to her little computer thing, which I suppose was progress. I called my mom back. "She wants you to come to Grandma's birthday," my mom said before I could even say hello. Grandma was turning 80. There was going to be a party at my aunt's house in Scottsdale, the big house with the infinity pool and the golf course view that she mentioned in every newsletter. 50, maybe 60 family members, a catered dinner, the whole production. "I don't know," I said. "She said she's worried about you." My mom's voice was careful. "She knows the history. She's watched the whole thing play out for decades, and she has never once taken my aunt's side, which is more than I can say for most of the family. She told me she thinks you've been isolating yourself, and she just wants to make sure you're okay." I almost laughed. My aunt had not called me directly in 3 years. She had not texted, not emailed, not acknowledged my existence at my cousin's wedding 2 summers ago beyond a brief nod across the reception hall. But now, for Grandma's 80th, she was worried about me. "She wants me there so she can show off," I said. My mom was quiet for a second. "Probably," she said. "But Grandma wants you there too. And that part is real." That was the part that got me. Grandma is the one person in that whole branch of the family who has always, without qualification, been in my corner. When I dropped out of the MBA program, everyone else either went silent or expressed their disappointment in careful, diplomatic ways. Grandma called me and said, "Good. I always thought business school was for people who didn't know what else to do." She was 80 years old, and she still had better instincts than most people I'd met with graduate degrees. So I booked a flight to Scottsdale. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters for what comes later. I did not go to that party planning to say anything. I was not going to announce my accomplishments or correct anyone's assumptions or make a scene. I was going to eat the catered food, hug my grandmother, and fly home Sunday morning. That was the plan. What I do for a living takes a while to explain, which is part of why my family had never really understood it. I build and scale e-commerce brands. I come in when a brand is either stuck or broken, sometimes both, and I figure out what's keeping them from growing, and then I fix it. Sometimes that means rebuilding their entire digital infrastructure. Sometimes it means a marketing overhaul. Sometimes it means identifying the 3 things they're doing wrong and being blunt enough to say it out loud. I started doing this freelance about 7 years ago, mostly because I couldn't find a job that wanted to use my actual brain. And somewhere along the way, the freelance work became a small agency, and the small agency became something considerably larger than that. I have 11 full-time employees. I have a roster of clients that would probably impress my aunt if she knew who they were, which she didn't because I had never told her. I don't talk about my work at family events. I learned early on that any attempt to explain what I do turns into a conversation about how I should really have a real job with benefits, and I stopped having that conversation sometime around my 27th birthday. The party was on a Saturday in March. I flew in Friday evening and stayed at a hotel rather than my aunt's house, which I'd been specifically invited to do. I told her I didn't want to be any trouble. What I meant was that I needed an exit. My mom met me at the hotel. We had dinner, just the two of us, and she caught me up on the family dynamics in the way only she can, with perfect accuracy and no editorializing. My cousin, my aunt's son, had recently gotten a new job. He was being considered for a VP-level position at a company that made enterprise software. He was 33. My aunt was, apparently, beside herself with pride. "How long has he been there?" I asked. "He started in January," my mom said. "The VP thing is still being discussed, it's not official." I nodded and ate my pasta and didn't say anything. The party was beautiful, I'll give her that. My aunt knows how to throw an event. The backyard had been strung with lights, the kind that look effortless but definitely aren't, and there were round tables with flower arrangements and a jazz trio playing near the pool. The food was from a restaurant I actually recognized, which meant she'd spent real money. Grandma was seated at the center table in a pale blue dress, and when she saw me walk in, she stood up and held out both arms, and I crossed the entire yard to hug her before I said hello to anyone else. "There she is," Grandma said, squeezing my hands. "My girl who doesn't call enough." "Grandma, I call every Sunday." "Call more," she said, and patted my cheek. I found my seat, which was, I noticed, at the far end of the table, farthest from the main action. I wasn't surprised. I got a glass of wine and said hello to the cousins I actually liked, and for about an hour everything was fine. Then my aunt found me. She came over with that particular walk she has. Measured, deliberate, the walk of someone who wants you to know they're approaching. She was wearing a cream-colored linen blazer and her hair was done. She kissed me on the cheek and held my arms and looked at me with that expression. "You look tired," she said. This is how she greets me. She has greeted me this way since I was approximately 19. "I just flew in from Portland," I said. "Of course." She nodded, like that explained everything. Like Portland itself was the problem. "How is everything going, with your work?" "Really well," I said. "Things are good." She tilted her head. Not quite a smile. "Still doing the freelance thing?" "I run an agency," I said. "We have about 11 people on staff now." "Oh." She said it the way people say, "oh," when they're not really listening. "Well, whatever makes you happy." She patted my arm. "As long as you're getting by." Getting by. I was 31 years old and I owned my apartment outright, and I had turned down an acquisition offer 6 months prior because the number wasn't right, and my aunt was asking if I was getting by. I smiled. "I'm doing fine," I said. She moved on. I refilled my wine. The moment I had been vaguely dreading happened about 45 minutes later, during dinner, when my uncle clinked his glass and stood up to say a few words about Grandma. It was a nice toast, actually, genuinely warm, full of real memories, and then at the end he pivoted, the way people do at these things, to mention how much it meant to have the whole family together, how proud Grandma was of all of them, how this generation was really making something of itself. And then he said my cousin's name. He talked for about 3 minutes about my cousin's new job, the VP track, the impressive company, the bright future. My aunt was beaming. My cousin was next to her looking slightly embarrassed in the way people look when they're not actually that embarrassed. The table applauded. I clapped. I genuinely did. I have nothing against my cousin. He's mostly fine. What happened next was not in the toast. It was after, when people were breaking off into smaller conversations and the servers were coming around with dessert. My aunt drifted back toward my end of the table and said, loudly enough for the 4 or 5 people nearby to hear, "It must be hard, you know, watching everyone your age really land somewhere, really build something real." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her dessert plate, but there was no question who she was talking to. I felt that particular thing you feel when someone says something openly cruel while maintaining perfect deniability. There's no good way to respond in the moment. If you say something, you're the one making a scene. If you say nothing, the thing just sits there. I said, "N," and reached for my own dessert. The woman next to me, one of my dad's cousins, someone I barely know, looked between us and then looked away. The table got quieter in that specific way that means everyone heard and no one wants to be the one to acknowledge it. My aunt started talking about the VP position again. The salary range, she said, was going to be very competitive. The company was publicly traded. Her son was, and I'm quoting here, going to be a millionaire before he's 35, which some of us haven't managed. She laughed when she said it, a light, easy laugh. I looked at my grandmother, who was across the table and had heard everything. Her expression was steady and unreadable in the way it gets when she's angry and choosing not to show it. I took a breath. Here's what I didn't say in that moment. I didn't say that I had incorporated my company 4 years ago and it was currently valued at something my aunt would not believe. I didn't say that I had a team of 11 people who were good at what they did and paid above market rate because I could afford to pay them well and because I believed that mattered. I didn't say any of that. I smiled and I said, "That sounds exciting for him," and I let it go. But something had shifted, the way things shift sometimes, quietly and without announcement. 3 days after the party, I was back in Portland. I was on a call with my operations director, working through a proposal for a new client, when I got a LinkedIn notification. I don't check LinkedIn obsessively. I check it the way most people check it, which is to say occasionally and with mild existential dread. But something made me open it. The notification was a connection request from my cousin. I accepted it, because why not? 20 minutes later, I got a message. "Hey, I think we're connected through work somehow. Small world. Would love to catch up." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I went to his profile. He was listed as Senior Account Manager at a company called Aldrin Solutions. No mention of a VP position. His most recent listed activity was sharing a post about exciting opportunities in enterprise sales, which is the kind of thing people post when they're job hunting. I went to our company's applicant tracking system. My agency had recently taken on a client in the enterprise software space, a referral from another client, the kind of thing that had become more common as we'd grown. As part of that engagement, we'd been doing some hiring on their behalf, screening candidates for a few mid-level and senior roles. It was a newer service we offered, and honestly, it was going well. I typed my cousin's name into the search bar. He had applied 6 weeks ago for a senior account executive role, not BP, a position 2 levels below what my aunt had described at the party. He was in the second round of screening. The hiring manager on my team had flagged him as promising but needs follow-up. I sat with that for a while. I want to be clear, I did not interfere with the process. I didn't pull his application or push it forward. I have an actual business to run and I don't make hiring decisions based on family politics. My team handles that work and they're good at it, and the most important thing I could do was stay out of the way. But I did forward myself his file, and I read it, and then I sat with a very specific knowledge that my aunt had stood up at her mother's 80th birthday party and implied in front of 40 people that her son was going to be a millionaire and I was barely getting by, while her son was applying for a position at a company we were working with at a level my team would have to approve. I called my mom that night. "She's been texting me," my mom said before I could get very far into the story. "She wants to know if you're doing okay. She said you seemed withdrawn at the party." "I'm not withdrawn," I said. "I know that." "Her son applied for a job at a company I'm doing a project for." The line went quiet. My mom has extremely good instincts and she tends to go very still when she's processing something significant. "Applied," she said, "not got the job." "Applied. He's in round 2. My team is handling it." "Are you going to say anything to him?" "I haven't decided." My mom thought about this. "What does your gut say?" "My gut says that she made that comment in front of half the family and nobody said anything." "That's true. And I've been not saying anything for about 12 years. Also true." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I'll say this. You don't have to protect her from the natural consequences of things she set in motion herself." I thought about that for a few days. The decision came to me not as a single moment, but as a slow settling. I wasn't going to manufacture a confrontation. I wasn't going to call anyone. What I was going to do was respond to my cousin's LinkedIn message, acknowledge that yes, our paths had crossed professionally, and let the situation exist as it actually was, rather than managing everyone's perception of it. I wrote back, "Hey, yeah, small world is right. Looks like we're connected through the Aldrin project. My team has been working with them for a few months. Good luck with the process." He read it within minutes. The reply took longer, almost 2 hours. "Wait, your team? Are you working with Aldrin?" "I run the agency that's supporting their growth work," I wrote back, "including some of their hiring pipeline." Small world. There was a very long pause. "I didn't realize that was your company," he wrote. "No reason you would have," I said, and I meant that genuinely. I had never talked about my work with that part of the family. The information gap wasn't his fault. He asked if we could talk. I said sure, and we got on a call the next evening. He was awkward in a way that I actually found a little endearing. He's not a bad person, my cousin. He's mostly been collateral in his mother's particular brand of competitive parenting. He admitted, partway through the call, that the VP thing had been more of an aspiration than a sure thing when his mom had talked about it at the party. He said she had a tendency to announce things before they were real. "She does that," I said. "I know." He was quiet for a second. "I'm sorry about what she said to you." "At the party. I heard it." I hadn't expected that. I let the silence sit for a moment. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I appreciate it." We talked for about 30 more minutes, mostly about the role and what Aldrin was looking for, which I could speak to honestly because I knew their business. I didn't promise him anything and he didn't ask me to. It was a professional conversation. By the end of it, I actually thought he might be decent at the job, which is not something I had expected to think. I didn't call my aunt. I didn't engineer a moment. But the thing about a family that talks to each other constantly is that information travels without any help from you. My aunt called my mom 2 weeks later. My mom told me about it that Sunday. "She knows," my mom said. "Knows what?" "That your company has something to do with how her son gets this job. She's been asking around. Apparently he told his dad, who told someone, and now she knows." "What did she say?" My mom paused. "She asked me why you never told anyone what you were doing." I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a genuine one, the kind that just comes out. "Because no one ever asked," I said. "And when I tried to tell them, they changed the subject to whether I had a retirement plan." My mom laughed too. "I know, baby." "What else did she say?" "She said she'd like to call you, that she wants to reconnect." I thought about 80-year-old grandma in her pale blue dress. I thought about 12 years of newsletters I'd never appeared in. I thought about whatever makes you happy and as long as you're getting by, and the specific tone of voice that accompanies a comment designed to diminish you in front of people you love. "She can call," I said. "I'll pick up." She called on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of something and I stepped away to take it. "I feel like we've never really talked," she said, which was a creative interpretation of our 31-year history. "I'd love to know more about what you do." There is a version of me, the version that existed 10 years ago, maybe even 5, that would have felt the particular desperate relief of finally being asked, would have rushed to explain, to prove, to justify. I didn't feel that. I felt something quieter and steadier. "I build brands," I said. "I help businesses grow. I've been doing it for about 7 years and I'm good at it." A pause. "And you have your own company." "I do." "Your mother said it's quite successful." "It is." Another pause. Longer this time. I let it sit. "I think I owe you an apology," she said finally. And to her credit, she said it without qualifications. "No, if I offended you." "No, I was just being honest." Just the apology plainly stated. I accepted it, not because everything was fine. It wasn't, and one phone call doesn't undo a decade of being made to feel like a disappointment in your own family, but because I'm not interested in carrying things I don't need to carry anymore. My cousin got the job, by the way, his own merit. My team evaluated him the same way they evaluated everyone else, and he was the right fit for the role. He started last month. He sent me a text the day he got the offer. Just, "Thank you for being straight with me." I wrote back, "That's all I know how to be." Grandma called me that Sunday like she does. She asked if I'd talk to my aunt. I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, You know, I always knew you were going to be the interesting one. Grandma. I mean it. The interesting ones always take longer. That's how you know they're doing something real. I was sitting on my apartment floor again, no pad die this time, laptop open to a new client proposal. The same floor, the same city, the same life that my aunt had looked at and seen something to pity. I looked at it and saw everything I'd built. I've thought a lot about why I never said anything for so long. 12 years is a long time to sit quietly at a table while someone uses your life as a cautionary tale. And for a while I told myself it was the mature choice, that proving people wrong with results was more meaningful than defending yourself with words. That part was true. But if I'm being honest, some of it was also just exhaustion. It's tiring to explain yourself to people who have already decided what you are. What changed wasn't the party. It wasn't even the LinkedIn message. What changed was the moment I realized my aunt's assumptions had consequences that were no longer abstract. She had built an entire story about who I was and what I was worth, and she had told that story in front of people I loved. And her son had gone out and made career decisions based on a version of reality that didn't exist. That's the thing about dismissing people. It doesn't just affect them. It shapes how you move through the world, and eventually the world corrects you. I don't think my aunt is a bad person. I think she's someone who confused status with value for so long that she genuinely couldn't see the difference anymore. She measured success by titles and salaries and the kind of trajectory that looks impressive in a newsletter. And because my path didn't look like that from the outside, she wrote me off. That's a failure of judgment, not of character, but it still caused real harm, quietly, over years. What I keep coming back to is my grandmother, 80 years old, sitting across that table in her pale blue dress, watching everything. She never said a word in the moment either, but she had spent decades cultivating the kind of wisdom that lets you read a room without reacting to it. The understanding that some situations resolve themselves if you give them enough time and space. She told me once that the interesting ones always take longer. I used to think that was just something you say to make someone feel better. I don't think that anymore. Building something real requires all three things at once, and they're harder to hold together than they sound. It requires integrity, doing the work honestly, paying your people well, not cutting corners when no one's watching. It requires clear thinking, knowing when to speak, when to stay quiet, when a situation calls for patience instead of a reaction. And it requires the kind of staying power that doesn't have a shortcut, the willingness to keep going through the years when nobody's paying attention and nobody's impressed, and the newsletters definitely don't mention your name. My cousin got the job on his own merit. I stayed out of it. And when he texted me to say thank you, I told him the truth. I hadn't done anything except treat the process like a process. That's all it ever was. I'm sitting on the same floor I've always sat on. The work is the same work. Nothing about my life looks dramatically different from the outside. But I know what I built, and I know what it took, and I know that the version of me my aunt described at that party, the one who was barely getting by, who hadn't managed to amount to much, never existed anywhere except in the story she needed to tell. That story was never mine. I just took a long time to stop letting her tell it.